you'll see on the screen soon the issue around COVID in this current crisis we've got. When television says we expect this many thousands of people to die or get sick, they're giving you a single point. But as you can see, all the professionals, CDC, etc., run their predictions in the future in 3 bands: best case, likely, worst case. So it's a well-established model. And again, you do the same for benefits. You do a best case, likely, worst case benefit. You do a best case, likely, worst case for costs, for development costs. And you end up with this much more informed view of the probabilities that your project's going to move into. Up on the screen right now, behind me, is a number. And I'm going to a sponsor and saying, you fund this project, this is your ROI. Everyone who'd look at that ROI would say, yep, I'm funding that. Now let me apply sensitivity analysis both to the benefits and the costs. And as you can see, in certain situations, the project doesn't have that 50%, it actually goes negative. And what informs that is risk. So if you then apply a benefit realization risk and a project risk, or what we call delivery risk, you suddenly get a much more informed view of whether you should approve this project. In effect, as you can see, if the project was high risk in terms of building and high benefit realization risk, you would not touch this project at all. Surprisingly, in the single point approach, and if you really want to do the project, you can see what's happened. The original 50% was the best case benefits, best case cost, which was never going to happen unless you seriously mitigated the risks. I've shown this to many executives, and for most of them, it's an eye-opener. No one has ever presented to them this clarity around the relationship between sensitivity analysis and risk. Final point about estimating. The easiest way to use risk and sensitivity analysis is, if it's a low-risk project, use all the best cases as your estimate and your commitment to the project. If you've got a medium risk project, you take the likelies, and if you've got a high risk, you take the worst case. That'll work at a high level, certainly up the front. But as you get more and more into the project, you can actually do quick individual risk assessments of user stories. And for a high risk user story, you use the worst case. For a low risk user story, you use the best case. So that's a much more finely grained and nuanced way of using risk to influence and select the figure that you're going to choose. Risk, by the way, and sensitivity analysis are so easy to use. I have gone to an organization and within a month converted all the business cases from cost equals one figure, benefits equals one figure, to cost equals best case, likely, worst case, benefit equals best case, and there hasn't been a single pushback from anyone, because you've got more information, you've got a more nuanced and more polished approach to how you estimate projects. Can I add 2 footnotes to this fairly long tutorial around estimation? The first is around the distinction between estimating and costing. They're different, but they're related. And there are a number of flaws that I've seen when people convert effort, estimates of effort, into estimates of cost. First one is that most people seriously overestimate how much time in the day they're productive. And there's lots of studies on this. If you think, for example, you're productive for 6 hours a day, you're going to then take that and convert the effort into an elapsed time. But if you're only getting 4 hours a day, because there's all this admin and interruption, you've got a major estimating error. This is a serious cause of estimating error, not in terms of the effort, but in terms of the elapsed time and, ipso facto, the cost of the project. So that's one example. Probably the most obvious example of undercosting projects while you convert effort to cost is the uncosting of stakeholder effort. This is traditionally very common. There's data that way back to that book I mentioned in 1968, where for each person working on a project full time, there could be a net business group, not on just one stakeholder, but a couple of stakeholders worth of effort. And because stakeholders are free, they're not costed. So you're seriously undercosting the project for the organization. Track the stakeholder time and add it to the costs, and also, of course, add it to the effort. Another example of poor costing is this use of unpaid overtime. This is a classic problem where you're actually working 30% more per day, which, by the way, because you're not costing it, you're not costing it, but in fact, it is a cost. It's a cost to you, and if that's not done the next project, it gets revealed as a cost to the client. Any time you spend in a project must be tracked, whether it's charged or not. Just get that head clear around effort versus costing. The final point I want to make is around contingency. It's a very controversial topic. Most people have standard figures like 10, 20, 30, depending on risk, and they just add it. If you go back to our sensitivity analysis, and you've got best case, likely, worst case, and you think, for example, this project's medium risk, so you're going to select the likely as the figure you're committing to, consider the difference between the likely and the worst case as your contingency. In other words, as risk shifts, for example, and you need contingency, you're more likely to move towards that particular worst case scenario. So a more structured approach to contingency is to use your sensitivity analysis and use the gaps between each of the bands, best, likely, and worst, as an indicator of your contingency. So there you go. A fairly long, but hopefully interesting and hopefully some learnings for you around the area of estimation. We need to get it better. Our reputations depend on it.